During dinner, my son-in-law leaned over and coldly declared, "The nursing home is waiting for you." I just smiled in response, so I became his boss at the company I had secretly acquired. He turned pale, shouted, "That's impossible!" and fell to his knees, begging for forgiveness for his betrayal. Before continuing, subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is in your region right now. The crystal wine glass caught the light as Douglas raised it to his lips, his fifth of the evening, if I'd been counting correctly. And I had been. 40 years as an actuary teaches you to notice patterns, to calculate probabilities, to see the numbers behind every gesture. Right now, the numbers were telling me something I didn't want to believe. "Russell, we need to talk." Douglas set down his glass with the careful precision of someone who'd had just enough wine to feel brave, but not enough to slur. "Carol and I have been discussing your situation." My situation. I sat at the head of my own dining table, the table I'd bought 35 years ago when Carol was just a baby, and watched my daughter avoid my eyes while her husband discussed my situation as if I weren't in the room. "We found a wonderful place for you," he continued, leaning forward with that salesman's smile I'd learned to distrust. "Springdale Manor. Beautiful facility, really top-notch. They have activities, medical staff on site, people your own age. You wouldn't be lonely there." The cold that spread through my chest had nothing to do with the Seattle March weather outside. It was the chill of recognition, of understanding dawning like a gray winter morning over Puget Sound. Carol finally looked up, her fingers whirring the linen napkin in her lap. "Dad, we just think the house is so big for one person, and you're here all alone most of the time." "We're thinking about the future," Douglas interrupted, warming to his subject. The wine had loosened his tongue, made him bold. "Your future, of course. But also, let's be practical here. This house is valuable. Really valuable. Queen Anne real estate, you know the market. It's, what, 2.8 million minimum? Just sitting here, not being used efficiently." There it was, not even hidden beneath a layer of concern. Just naked greed, served up alongside the roasted chicken I'd prepared myself because I'd wanted to make dinner special for them. "You'd have your own room at Springdale," Carol added quickly. "They have gardens, and it's only $3,200 a month," Douglas said. "Very reasonable. We've done the research. Over a year, that's what? Barely 40,000. Compare that to maintaining this place. Property taxes alone must be killing you." I wasn't killing anyone. I wanted to laugh at the irony. They thought they were saving me from financial burden, while simultaneously calculating how much they'd profit from selling my home out from under me. "We're not saying you need to decide tonight," Douglas continued, pouring himself another glass. "6th. But June isn't far away. We've already spoken to them and they have availability. It's really the best solution for everyone." Everyone. I let the word hang in the air between us, watching their faces. Carol still couldn't meet my eyes. Douglas had the satisfied look of a man who thought he'd just delivered good news. Neither of them saw what I saw, their own reflections in the dark windows behind me, two people I didn't quite recognize anymore. This house held 35 years of memories. Every room had a story. The kitchen where I'd taught Carol to bake her first birthday cake, the living room where she'd practiced piano for years, the garden where we'd scattered her mother's ashes when... No, I wouldn't let them weaponize those memories against me. "You've put a lot of thought into this," I said quietly. Douglas brightened, mistaking my tone for agreement. "We have. And honestly, Russell, it's time. You're what, 68? 70? These are your golden years. You should be enjoying them, not worrying about maintaining a house this size." 68. He couldn't even be bothered to remember my age exactly. I'd been at his wedding 4 years ago, had welcomed him into this family, into this house. And now he sat at my table, drinking my wine, planning my exile. Something shifted inside me in that moment. Some part of myself I'd kept politely contained for too long. I'd spent 2 years watching this transformation, seeing the man my daughter had married slowly reveal his true nature. 2 years of biting my tongue, of being the understanding father-in-law, of letting small slights pass unremarked. 2 years of calculating, observing, gathering data like the professional I'd always been. "Well," I said, standing slowly. "This is certainly something to think about." Douglas and Carol exchanged a glance, relief mixed with triumph. They thought I was going to roll over, that the old man would go quietly into their carefully selected facility while they divided up his assets. I cleared the dishes with steady hands, declined their half-hearted offers to help, and waited until they'd gone upstairs to the second floor they'd temporarily occupied a year ago. Then I stood at my kitchen sink, looking out at the lights of Seattle spread below my Queen Anne Hill, and let myself acknowledge the truth I'd been avoiding. My daughter and her husband wanted to dispose of me, and they thought I was too old, too tired, too helpless to stop them. They had no idea who they were dealing with. They saw a retired actuary living alone in an expensive house. They didn't see the chess player, the strategist, the man who'd spent 40 years calculating risks and outcomes for a living. If they wanted to play games with my future, fine. But they were about to learn that I'd written the rule book they didn't even know existed. Sleep wouldn't come. I walked through my empty house at 2 a.m, each room triggering memories I'd tried to keep locked away during dinner. The second-floor hallway where Carol had learned to ride her bicycle indoors during a week of rain. She'd been 7, determined and fearless, pedaling back and forth while I spotted her, ready to catch her if she fell. "I've got you, sweetheart," I'd said. "I'll always catch you." Who was catching whom now? In her old bedroom, now Douglas's makeshift home office cluttered with his business ventures. I remembered teaching her about money when she turned 18. We'd sat at her desk, and I'd showed her how to balance a checkbook, how to invest, how to think long-term. "Remember, honey, money is a tool, not a goal. It should serve your life, not become your life." She'd understood then, or I'd thought she had. I moved to the living room, where a photograph still sat on the mantel. Carol at 10, grinning gap-toothed in her soccer uniform, holding a trophy almost as big as she was. I remembered that day with painful clarity. She'd scored the winning goal, and afterward she'd run straight to me, bypassing all her teammates. "Dad, did you see? Did you see?" I'd seen everything. I'd always seen everything. The memories shifted, became more recent. 4 years ago, this same living room. Carol bringing Douglas home for the first time, her hand clasped tightly in his, her face glowing with new love. I'd shaken his hand, welcomed him, offered him a drink, and I'd watched his eyes move around the room, cataloging, assessing, calculating the value of every piece of furniture, every painting, every square foot of Seattle real estate. I'd seen it then, the hunger, the way he looked at this house the same way some men look at jewelry stores. But Carol had been so happy, and I'd convinced myself I was being paranoid, overly protective, unable to let my daughter grow up. I should have trusted my instincts. 40 years of analyzing risk patterns, and I'd ignored the biggest red flag of my life. The signs had been there all along, small at first. Douglas's casual comments about Queen Anne property values, how he'd mentioned seeing a house listed for millions, then glanced meaningfully around my living room. "You're sitting on a gold mine here, Russell. You know that, right?" I'd known. I'd also known what he was really saying. Then came their financial troubles, which they thought they'd hidden from me. But I'd seen the credit card bills left carelessly on the kitchen counter. I'd heard Douglas on phone calls, his voice tight with stress, talking about opportunities and investments that never quite materialized. I'd watched my daughter's wardrobe become more expensive, even as the worry lines around her eyes deepened. They'd moved in temporarily last year. "Just until we get back on our feet, Dad," Carol had said. "Douglas has some deals in the works, and we need to save on rent for a few months." A few months had become a year. The second floor had become their domain, and I'd become gradually an obstacle to their plans, rather than a person they loved. The worst part? I'd let it happen. I'd observed, documented, analyzed, and done nothing. Because she was my daughter, and I'd wanted to believe that somewhere under the financial stress and Douglas's influence, the girl who'd run to me with her soccer trophy still existed. Tonight had proven otherwise. I made my way to my study, to the safe hidden behind a painting of the Olympic Mountains. Inside were documents I'd kept private for 2 years, since I'd quietly restructured my business interests. Papers that Douglas and Carol knew nothing about because they'd never bothered to ask about my work beyond, "How's retirement treating you?" If they'd asked, they might have learned that I hadn't fully retired, that the consulting firm I'd built over decades still existed, still thrived, managed by partners I trusted while I maintained majority ownership from the shadows. That Gilbert Risk Solutions wasn't just a name on some old letterhead. It was a multi-million-dollar enterprise specializing in corporate risk management and insurance consulting. They saw an old man rattling around in an expensive house. They didn't see the strategist who'd spent 40 years teaching corporations how to minimize risk and maximize outcomes. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through recent messages. Last week, Jonathan Kelly, my executive director, had sent me an update on the Pacific Northwest Insurance Corporation acquisition. Moving forward with the merger should be finalized by May. Your call on operational oversight? My call, my company, my rules. I sat in my leather chair, the one Carol used to curl up in while I read her bedtime stories, and felt something cold and sharp crystallize in my chest. Not anger, exactly. Anger was hot, impulsive, emotional. This was something else. This was calculation, assessment, risk analysis. Douglas wanted to play games with my home, my future, my security. He wanted to park me in a facility while he cashed in on my life's work. Fine. Let's calculate the odds of that working out for him. I opened my laptop and began composing an email to Marcus Torres, my attorney, then another to Jonathan, then a series of calls that would need to happen tomorrow, all scheduled with the precision I'd learned from decades of actuarial work. Outside my study window, Seattle was waking up. Dawn light touched the waters of Puget Sound, turned the downtown skyscrapers into pillars of gold and glass. This city had been my home for 40 years. This house had been my sanctuary, my investment, my gift to my daughter's future. They thought they could take it from me. They thought I was weak, helpless, too old to fight back. They were about to learn the difference between being quiet and being defeated. "All right, Douglas," I murmured to the empty room. "You want to play? Let me show you how professionals do it." The game was on, and they'd just made their opening move without realizing I'd been setting up the board for 2 years. I became a ghost in my own house over the next 2 weeks. Not invisible, just unnoticed. Funny how people stop seeing you when they've already decided you don't matter. Douglas and Carol moved through the rooms like I was furniture, discussing their plans with the casual indifference of people dividing up an estate before the funeral. The kitchen became my listening post. I'd make coffee in the morning, slowly, methodically, while they talked at the dining table. The old coffee maker was loud enough to mask the fact that I could hear every word. "He's coming around," Douglas told someone on his phone Tuesday morning. I recognized the tone, the same one he used when closing a sale at work. The old man practically agreed at dinner. Just needs a little nudge, you know? But man, Kevin, the house is worth minimum $2.8 million. 2.8. Can you imagine? This changes everything. I poured my coffee with steady hands. 2.8 million. He'd done his research. I'd done mine too. The house was actually worth 3.2 in the current market, but I wasn't about to correct him. Carol was on her laptop at the table, and I could see the screen reflected in the window. Nursing home comparison websites. She scrolled past the luxury facilities, the ones with actual medical care, the ones that treated residents like human beings, and lingered on the mid-range options, places with names like Sunset Gardens and Golden Years Community that looked acceptable in photos, but had reviews mentioning understaffing and limited activities. Even in my disposal, they were bargain hunting. The irony would have been hilarious if it weren't so pathetic. "This one looks decent," Carol said, turning the laptop toward Douglas. "Springdale Manor. Only $3,200 a month." 3,200 times 12, Douglas calculated out loud. 38,000 a year. Not bad. "But what if he—" Carol hesitated. "What if he lives a long time?" Douglas shrugged, not even looking up from his phone. "Then we move him somewhere cheaper. There's that place in Tacoma, remember? 2,000 a month. It's not as nice, but at that point, does it really matter?" I set my coffee cup down too hard. They both glanced over, but I was already turning away, heading toward my study. Behind me, I heard Carol whisper, "Do you think he heard?" "Who cares?" Douglas's voice carried more than he probably intended. "He's not exactly in a position to complain." In my study, I closed the door and stood at the window, looking out at the garden I'd maintained for 35 years. The cherry tree Carol and I had planted when she was 5 was in full bloom, pink petals drifting across the lawn like snow. She used to play under that tree for hours, bringing me flowers she'd picked, demanding I put them in water immediately before they wilted. Now she was shopping for the cheapest place to warehouse me while she cashed in on my home. That evening I positioned myself in the living room with a book I had no intention of reading. They thought I couldn't hear them on the second floor, but this old house had vents that carried sound beautifully. Another thing they didn't know about the property they were so eager to sell. "It's going to be amazing," Douglas was saying. "We sell the house, buy something smaller, maybe one of those new condos downtown, half the price, pocket the difference, and I can finally quit that soul-crushing job and focus on the startup full-time." "Are you sure about the tech angle?" Carol sounded uncertain. "You said the last investor—" "That investor was an idiot who didn't understand the market. This is different. This is AI-driven customer analytics. It's the future, Carol. But I need capital. Real capital. Your dad's house is the answer." "Your dad? Not Russell? Not even my father-in-law. Just your dad. Like I was a problem to be solved rather than a person." I did some research of my own that night. Douglas's startup was vaporware. I'd seen this pattern 100 times in my career. Big dreams, no actual product, just PowerPoint presentations and buzzwords. He wanted to quit his job at Pacific Northwest Insurance Corp to become an entrepreneur, funded entirely by liquidating my life's work. The audacity was almost admirable. Almost. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to a contact I hadn't called in months. Marcus Torres, my attorney. Marcus had handled my estate planning, my business restructuring when I'd quietly shifted Gilbert Risk Solutions into a holding company structure. He was discreet, thorough, and expensive. "Marcus," I said when he answered, "I need a consultation, private, urgent." "Russell? It's been a while. Everything okay?" "Define okay," I said, watching Douglas through the window as he paced the garden, phone pressed to his ear, probably telling another friend about his brilliant plan. "I need to discuss some family matters, and some corporate governance questions." "Corporate governance?" Marcus sounded intrigued. "I didn't know you were still active in business." "There's a lot people don't know about me, Marcus. That's been part of the problem." After we set the meeting for Thursday, I went to my safe and pulled out the folder I'd been avoiding for 2 years. Gilbert Risk Solutions, confidential, was stamped across the front in red letters. Inside were documents that Douglas and Carol would never see unless I wanted them to. Incorporation papers, partnership agreements, the holding company structure that kept my name off public records, and most recently, the preliminary offer documents for acquiring Pacific Northwest Insurance Corp. That last one was particularly interesting. The acquisition had been in negotiation for 6 months, moving slowly through regulatory approval and due diligence. I'd let Jonathan Kelly handle the public-facing aspects. He was my executive director, the name everyone in the industry knew. I preferred working from the shadows, analyzing risk assessments and making strategic decisions without the spotlight. Douglas had no idea that the company slowly squeezing his department, with efficiency reviews and budget cuts, was ultimately controlled by the old man he was trying to throw into a nursing home. The irony was so perfect, it almost hurt. I heard footsteps on the stairs and quickly returned the folder to the safe. Carol appeared at my study door, looking hesitant. "Dad, you okay? You've been quiet tonight." I turned to her with a smile I'd perfected over 40 years of negotiating with people who underestimated me. "Just tired, honey. It's been a long day." "About Springdale Manor," she stepped inside, closing the door behind her. "I want you to know we're doing this because we care. The house is too much for you to handle alone." "Is it?" I asked mildly. "Well, yes. I mean, look at it. 3 floors, that big garden. What if you fall? What if something happens and no one's here to help?" "You're here," I pointed out. "You and Douglas, living on the 2nd floor. Doesn't that solve the problem?" She flushed. "We can't stay forever, Dad. Douglas has his career, and we're thinking about our future. Kids, maybe. We need our own space." Kids. They hadn't mentioned that before. I wondered if it was true or just another justification, another layer of fiction to make the betrayal more palatable. "Of course," I said. You need to think about your future. I understand completely. She relaxed, relief flooding her face. She'd expected resistance, and my acquiescence confused her. Good. Let her be confused. Confused people made mistakes, revealed truths they meant to hide. After she left, I sat in the dark of my study and thought about the cherry tree outside, about Carol at 5 years old, about all the versions of my daughter that had existed before this one. And I thought about Douglas, so confident in his schemes, so certain he was playing chess while everyone else was playing checkers. He had no idea what game we were actually playing, but he was about to find out. Marcus Torres had an office downtown in the Columbia Center, 43rd floor with a view of Elliott Bay. I'd deliberately chosen to meet him there instead of somewhere closer to home. The last thing I needed was Douglas or Carol spotting my car at a law office in Queen Anne. "So," Marcus said, settling into his leather chair and pouring us both coffee, "tell me what's going on." I laid it out clinically the way I'd present a risk assessment to a client. The facts, the timeline, the behavior patterns. No emotional appeals, no requests for sympathy. Just data. Marcus's expression darkened as I talked. "They want to put you in a nursing home so they can sell your house?" "That's the simple version, yes." "Russell, you have options here. Legal options. We could draft documents that prevent them from—" "I don't want to prevent them," I interrupted. "I want to educate them." He studied me for a long moment. "You have something in mind." "I have a question first. Corporate governance. If Company A acquires Company B, what level of control does Company A have over Company B's personnel decisions?" Marcus leaned back, his lawyer brain engaging with the puzzle. "Complete control, assuming the acquisition includes operational management rights. The acquiring company can restructure, reassign, even terminate employees as they see fit within legal boundaries." "Why?" I smiled. "Hypothetically, if I were to acquire a company, through a holding structure maintaining privacy, could I install myself or my representatives in operational oversight positions?" "Hypothetically? Yes. It's completely legal and actually quite common in consulting firm acquisitions. The acquiring entity often places their own people to ensure the transition aligns with their business model." He paused. "Russell, what aren't you telling me? Can Gilbert Risk Solutions act as an operational controller if we acquire a company?" His eyebrows rose. "GRS? I thought you'd stepped back from day-to-day operations." "I have, but I still own the majority stake, and Jonathan runs things brilliantly. We're in the process of acquiring an insurance company, Pacific Northwest Insurance Corp. You might have heard of it. The PNIC deal. That's been in the news, but they haven't announced the acquiring party yet, just that it's happening." Understanding dawned on his face. Oh, indeed. And let me guess, someone you know works for Pacific Northwest?" "My son-in-law, Douglas Palmer, middle management, completely unaware that his company is being absorbed by a firm that I own." Marcus let out a low whistle. That's elegant, Russell. Ruthless, but elegant. I prefer to think of it as educational. He wants to dispose of me like I'm a burden, liquidate my assets for his own gain. I think he should understand what it feels like to have his security, his future, controlled by someone else's whims. You're going to become his boss. I'm going to become his operational supervisor, yes. Perfectly legal, perfectly documented, and perfectly positioned to evaluate his performance over the past several years. I paused. Years during which I suspect his work has been less than exemplary. Marcus was quiet for a moment, then shook his head with something like admiration. "You've been planning this." "I've been observing. Planning came later. But yes, the pieces are in position. I just need to confirm I'm not crossing any legal lines." "You're not. As long as you're acting within corporate policy and not engaging in personal harassment or discrimination, you have every right to oversee operations in a company your firm acquires. If his work performance is genuinely lacking, documented termination is completely legal." "Good." I stood, extending my hand. "I'll need you on retainer for the next few months. Things might get complicated." "Russell," Marcus said, shaking my hand. "Off the record, sometimes people need to learn there are consequences for treating others like disposable assets." I drove home slowly, taking the long route through downtown Seattle. The spring afternoon was beautiful, cherry blossoms everywhere. The kind of day that made you remember why you loved this city, despite the rain. I'd built my life here, raised my daughter here, planned to die here someday, in my own home, on my own terms. Douglas and Carol had other ideas. Time to show them how wrong they were. When I walked through my front door, I heard voices from the dining room. They were spread out across my table with brochures, laptops, and what looked like financial spreadsheets. Planning my future. How thoughtful. "Oh, Dad," Carol brightened when she saw me. "Perfect timing. We wanted to show you some of the options we've been looking at." I set down my briefcase and joined them, playing the interested father. "Let's see." Douglas pushed a brochure toward me. "This is Springdale Manor. It's really nice, Russell. Look at the activities they offer. Bingo, movie nights, garden club." Bingo. They wanted to reduce my life to bingo and movie nights while they sold my home and funded Douglas's fantasy startup. "And the cost?" I asked mildly. "Very reasonable," Douglas said quickly. $3,200 a month. When you factor in what you're spending on property taxes and maintenance here, it's actually a savings." $3,200 times 12, I said. "That's $38,400 a year." Carol jumped in. "It's an investment in your quality of life, Dad. You'll have medical care right there, activities, social opportunities." "And if I live another 20 years?" I asked. "That's $768,000, not including inflation or rate increases, which I'm sure they have." Silence. They hadn't expected me to do math. "We're not looking at it that way," Douglas said carefully. "We're thinking about your immediate needs." "My immediate needs," I repeated. "Not yours?" "Of course not ours," Carol said, but her voice was too bright, too defensive. "This is about you." I picked up one of their spreadsheets. They'd calculated the sale price of my house, subtracted estimated taxes and fees, and divided the remaining amount into neat categories. One column caught my eye. D's business investment, $800K, $800,000, more than half the projected profit from selling my home, earmarked for Douglas's startup. "This is interesting," I said, tapping the spreadsheet. "You've done a lot of planning." Douglas tried to grab it back, but I held on. "We're just exploring possibilities. Nothing's decided." "No," I agreed. "Nothing's decided. But you're certainly prepared." I left the papers on the table and headed to my study, feeling their eyes on my back. Let them wonder. Let them worry about what I was thinking. In my study, I made 3 phone calls. First to Jonathan Kelly, my executive director at Gilbert Risk Solutions. "The PNIC acquisition, are we still on schedule for May?" "We are. Final regulatory approval should come through in 2 weeks. We'll announce shortly after." "Good. I want to take an active role in the transition. Operational oversight, particularly of the management-level employees." Jonathan chuckled. "You're coming out of the shadows? This must be interesting." "You have no idea. Start preparing the documentation. I'll need full access to personnel files, performance reviews, everything." Second call. Back to Marcus Torres. "I need you to audit my own estate documents. Make sure everything is airtight. If Douglas or Carol try to claim financial elder abuse or incompetence, I want ironclad proof that I'm of sound mind and acting independently." "I'll have it done by next week." Third call to my accountant. "I need a full financial disclosure prepared, showing my assets, income streams, and the structure of Gilbert Risk Solutions. I want it documented that I'm financially independent and don't need anyone's help managing my affairs." When I finished, I walked to the mantel and picked up the photograph of Carol at 10, the one I'd been looking at for days. That little girl in the soccer uniform had trusted me to catch her. Now I had to trust that somewhere inside the woman she'd become, that little girl still existed. But first, she and Douglas needed to learn a lesson they should have learned a long time ago. People aren't disposable. Houses aren't just assets, and underestimating someone based on age is a mistake that comes with consequences. I looked out the window at Douglas in the garden, on his phone again, probably telling another friend about his brilliant plan. He had no idea what was coming. In 6 weeks, when he walked into that conference room and saw me standing there as his new supervisor, the look on his face would be worth every sleepless night I'd spent planning this. "I'm sorry, Carol," I murmured to the photograph, "but you made your choice. Now you'll both learn what it means to calculate risk." The game was about to begin, and unlike Douglas, I actually knew how to play. May arrived with the kind of perfect Seattle weather that makes you forget the 9 months of rain. Clear skies, cherry blossoms everywhere, and Douglas whistling as he headed to work at Pacific Northwest Insurance Corp. I watched from my study window as he backed his car out of the driveway, completely oblivious to the fact that his world was about to shift on its axis. I'd spent the past 6 weeks being the perfect compliant old man. Agreeable, passive, a little confused perhaps, exactly what they expected to see. Carol and Douglas had relaxed, confident in their victory. They'd even started bringing real estate agents by just to get a sense of the market. I'd smiled and nodded and asked questions about Springdale Manor's bingo schedule. The performance would have won me an Oscar. Jonathan called me at 9:30. "It's done. We're making the announcement at 10. And the personnel files? On your desk. Everything you asked for. Russell, some of this is, well, let's just say your son-in-law hasn't exactly been Employee of the Month material." "I'm shocked," I said dryly. Absolutely shocked. I imagined Douglas sitting in whatever meeting room they used for all-hands gatherings, probably checking his phone, maybe thinking about lunch. Definitely not thinking about me. That was his first mistake. His second mistake had been underestimating what I'd built over 40 years. The call came at 2:15. Douglas, his voice tight with forced casualness. "Hey, Russell, quick question. Did you ever hear of a company called Gilbert Risk Solutions?" I let the pause stretch just long enough. "Why do you ask?" "They just bought PNIC. Some kind of merger. They're sending people to evaluate departments, talking about restructuring." He laughed, but it sounded hollow. "Probably nothing to worry about, but you know how it is. Corporate changes make everyone nervous." "I'm sure you'll be fine," I said. "You're good at your job, aren't you?" Another pause. Yeah, of course. It's just, the timing is bad. We're trying to get things settled with Springdale Manor, and if my job is uncertain, you want to accelerate the timeline? Well, yes. It would be better to have everything finalized before any potential changes at work. You understand? Oh, I understood perfectly. His company had been acquired, and his first thought wasn't about his performance or career. It was about liquidating my assets faster before he lost his income stream. "Let's talk about it tonight," I said. That evening, they cornered me in the living room with printouts from Springdale Manor. Carol had the grace to look uncomfortable, but Douglas was in full sales mode. "So we've been thinking," he said, spreading the papers on the coffee table. "Why wait until the end of summer? They have a room available in June. Beautiful corner unit, gets great light. And with the uncertainty at my work, it makes sense to move forward now." "June," I repeated. "That's only a few weeks away." "Exactly. Perfect timing. We can help you pack, get you settled. You'll love it there, Russell, and honestly, with everything going on at PNIC, I need to know our financial situation is stable." There it was, not even pretending it was about my welfare anymore. Carol touched my arm. "Dad, we really think this is best, for everyone." I looked at my daughter, 40 years old, and I could still see traces of the girl who used to bring me dandelions from the yard. Somewhere along the way, I'd failed to teach her the most important lesson, that people aren't commodities, that parents aren't assets to be liquidated when convenient. "All right," I said quietly, "if that's what you both want." Douglas's face lit up. He'd expected resistance, arguments, maybe tears. My capitulation was so easy, it should have worried him. Carol's expression flickered with something, doubt maybe, or the ghost of a conscience, but it passed quickly. "Really?" Douglas said. "You're okay with June?" "I'm 68 years old, Douglas. What choice do I have? You've made it clear this house is too much for me, that I need supervision, that I'm a burden. June is fine." "You're not a burden," Carol said automatically, but the words were hollow. We both knew it. After they went upstairs, practically celebrating their victory, I returned to my study and closed the door. Then I called Jonathan. "Tomorrow," I said, "announce my role. Full operational oversight of the PNIC integration. I want an office, access to all personnel files, and a meeting with department heads by end of week." "Russell, are you sure about this? Coming out of the shadows after all these years?" "I'm sure. It's time Douglas learned who he's been trying to dispose of. Your son-in-law is going to have a very bad day. I'm counting on it. Oh, and Jonathan, Make sure the announcement emphasizes my 40 years of industry experience and my direct involvement in the acquisition. I want everyone to understand exactly who's in charge. Consider it done. This is going to be interesting. That's one word for it. I hung up and poured myself a scotch. Macallan 25. The bottle I'd been saving for a special occasion. This qualified. I stood at the window, looking out at the lights of Seattle, at the city where I'd built my career, my life, my home. Douglas thought he could take all of that and reduce it to a line item on a spreadsheet. Carol thought she could trade her father for financial security. They were both about to learn a very expensive lesson about actuarial risk assessment. The kind of lesson I'd spent 40 years teaching corporations. Always calculate the full cost of your decisions. Always consider what you're risking. Always understand who you're dealing with. Tomorrow, Douglas would walk into a conference room expecting a routine corporate update. Instead, he'd discover that the helpless old man he'd been plotting to warehouse was actually the person who now controlled his professional future. I smiled at my reflection in the window. The old man looking back at me didn't look helpless anymore. He looked like exactly what he was, a strategist who'd spent 6 weeks setting up the perfect checkmate. "Game on," I said to the empty room. Monday morning I dressed with care. Charcoal suit, crisp white shirt, burgundy tie, the armor of the corporate world. I hadn't worn a suit in 2 years, and it felt like putting on a different persona, the one I'd built over 4 decades, the one Douglas and Carol had never bothered to notice. I arrived at the Pacific Northwest Insurance Corp building at 9:30, half an hour before the scheduled meeting. Stephen Morris from HR met me in the lobby, his handshake firm and professional. "Mr. Gilbert, it's an honor. I've heard stories about your work in the 90s. The Microsoft Risk Assessment Project is still taught as a case study." "Ancient history," I said, but I appreciated the recognition. It reminded me that I'd earned my reputation, that I wasn't just some old man taking up space in a valuable house. "The conference room is ready. Everyone will be there at 10 sharp, Mr. Palmer included." "Perfect." Stephen gave me a curious look. "If you don't mind my asking, sir, there's been some speculation about why you're taking such a hands-on role in this integration. Most owners prefer to stay behind the scenes." "Let's just say I have a personal interest in ensuring this transition is handled properly, particularly when it comes to management-level performance evaluations." Understanding flickered in his eyes. "I see. Well, then, this should be enlightening." The conference room was standard corporate issue. Long table, uncomfortable chairs, a screen for presentations, windows overlooking downtown Seattle. I positioned myself at the head of the table and reviewed my notes while employees filtered in. I recognized some faces from Carol's Facebook posts, Douglas's colleagues, people he'd probably complained to about his difficult father-in-law. None of them recognized me. At exactly 10 o'clock, Douglas walked in, coffee in hand, chatting with a coworker about weekend plans. He took a seat halfway down the table, checked his phone, completely relaxed. He didn't even glance in my direction. Stephen Morris cleared his throat. "Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. As you know, Pacific Northwest Insurance has recently been acquired by Gilbert Risk Solutions, a leading firm in risk management consulting. Today, you'll be meeting the operational controller who will be overseeing our department integration and evaluation process." Douglas set down his coffee, straightened in his chair. The word evaluation had registered. Good. Let him be nervous. "Please welcome Mr. Russell Gilbert." I stood, gathering my materials, and walked to the front of the room. The exact moment Douglas saw me was perfect. His hand frozen halfway to his coffee cup, his mouth slightly open, his eyes going wide with something between confusion and dawning horror. His face went through several colors in rapid succession. First a normal pink, then pale, then gray, like someone had adjusted the saturation settings on a photograph. His mouth worked soundlessly, opening and closing like a fish trying to breathe air. The coffee cup trembled in his hand before he set it down with a clatter that echoed in the suddenly silent room. It was beautiful. "Good morning," I said, making eye contact with each person in the room. "For those who don't know me, I'm Russell Gilbert. I've been working in actuarial science and risk management for 40 years. I founded Gilbert Risk Solutions in 1992. And we've recently acquired Pacific Northwest Insurance as part of our expansion strategy. I let that sink in. Several people were looking at Douglas now, watching his reaction. One of the older employees, someone who'd probably been in the industry long enough to recognize my name, was nodding slowly, impressed. Over the next several months, I'll be directly involved in evaluating departmental efficiency, management practices, and personnel performance. This is not a hostile takeover. This is an integration designed to strengthen both organizations. However, that integration will require honest assessment of current operations. My gaze landed on Douglas. His face had gone from gray to a blotchy red, and a thin sheen of sweat was forming on his forehead, despite the office air conditioning. His hands were clasped together on the table in front of him, knuckles white, like he was physically holding himself together. "Mr. Palmer," I said, and watched him flinch at his own name. "You look surprised. I take it no one mentioned that GRS was my company?" He tried to speak, failed, tried again. But how is this possible?" I supplied helpfully. "It's quite straightforward, actually. I've owned GRS for 33 years. We've been quietly successful, operating primarily in the consulting space. This acquisition has been in the works for 6 months. I'm surprised you didn't know. But then, we've established that you don't ask many questions, haven't we?" The other employees were looking confused now, sensing undercurrents they didn't understand. I didn't care. This moment was for Douglas, and he was getting the full weight of it. His throat worked as he swallowed. "Sir, I had no idea you were involved in... we never discussed a lot of things, Douglas. You never asked about my work, my career, what I did before retirement. You were too busy calculating the square footage of my house and planning your startup." Someone gasped softly. The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. "I think," I continued, walking slowly down the length of the table, "that we've all made assumptions about people based on limited information. That's a critical error in risk assessment. You have to gather all the data before making decisions. Otherwise, you might discover you've miscalculated quite badly." I stopped directly across from Douglas. His eyes were darting around the room, looking for an escape, for an explanation, for anything that would make this make sense. His hands had started trembling, and he pressed them flat against the table to hide it. "Over the next few weeks," I said, addressing the room but keeping my eyes on Douglas, "I'll be reviewing performance metrics for all management-level employees. I'll be examining decision-making processes, expenditure justifications, and overall value added to the organization. Everyone will have the opportunity to demonstrate their competence." I smiled, and from Douglas's expression it wasn't a reassuring smile. Or their lack thereof. Douglas's mouth opened again. You can't. There are rules about conflicts of interest." "Are there?" I raised an eyebrow. "Do enlighten me, Mr. Palmer. Are you suggesting that a company owner can't oversee operations in an acquired firm? I'd be fascinated to hear the legal basis for that claim. I'm sure my attorney, Marcus Torres, you might want to write down his name, would be equally interested." His face went pale again. He'd trapped himself, and he knew it. Claiming conflict of interest meant acknowledging our relationship, which meant acknowledging that I had legitimate reasons to question his performance. Saying nothing meant accepting my authority. Either way, he lost. "I thought not," I said. "Now let's discuss the integration timeline. I'll be working from an office on this floor, and I'll be scheduling individual meetings with each of you over the next week. Please be prepared to discuss your current projects, your performance metrics for the past 18 months, and your vision for your role in the newly integrated organization." I glanced at Douglas one more time. His hands were shaking so badly now that he'd given up trying to hide it. Sweat was running down his temple. His carefully styled hair was already starting to look disheveled from the way he kept running his hand through it, nervously. "Mr. Palmer, you'll be first. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Don't be late." The meeting continued for another 30 minutes, but Douglas didn't hear a word of it. I could see him spiraling, his mind racing through all the implications, all the ways his carefully constructed plans had just detonated in his face. When I finally dismissed everyone, he sat frozen in his chair while others filed out. Only after the room was empty did he stand shakily and approach me. "Russell, we need to talk about..." Do we? I gathered my materials calmly. I don't think we have anything to discuss outside of your professional performance review, which I remind you is tomorrow at 9. You're doing this because of the house, because of Springdale Manor. I looked at him then, really looked at him. No, Douglas, I'm doing this because you tried to dispose of me like I was worthless, because you calculated my value as nothing more than real estate equity, because you thought being old made me helpless. I stepped closer, and he actually stepped back. You wanted to play games with my life. Welcome to the game. I hope you studied the rules. I walked out, leaving him standing in that conference room, and I swear I could feel his world crumbling behind me. It felt extraordinary. The next 3 weeks were exquisite torture for Douglas, and I'll admit I enjoyed every minute of it. I maintained perfect professional courtesy at work. I reviewed his reports with meticulous attention to detail, asked probing questions during meetings, and offered suggestions that were simultaneously helpful and impossible to implement quickly. I never raised my voice, never showed personal animosity. I was simply a thorough, demanding supervisor doing his job, which made it so much worse for him. I watched him unravel in slow motion. The confident swagger disappeared within days. He started arriving early, staying late, hunched over his desk with the desperate energy of someone trying to bail water from a sinking ship. His presentations became rambling messes as he second-guessed every word. During team meetings, I'd catch him staring at me with an expression somewhere between hatred and pleading. The house, meanwhile, had become a war zone. It started the Friday of that first week. I was in my study reviewing personnel files when Douglas burst in without knocking. His face was flushed, his hair disheveled from running his hands through it repeatedly, a nervous habit I'd noticed he'd developed. "Why didn't you tell us you owned a company?" he demanded. "Why didn't you say anything?" I looked up from my reading, taking my time to mark my place before responding. "You never asked about my work, Douglas. In 4 years, you never once inquired about my career, my accomplishments, what I did before retirement. You saw an old man in a valuable house and decided that was all I was." "That's not fair, isn't it?" I set down my pen. "You spent months planning to sell my home out from under me. You calculated the square footage, the market value, even figured out the cheapest nursing home you could warehouse me in, but you never bothered to learn anything about the person whose life you were planning to dismantle." Carol appeared in the doorway behind him, her face pale. "Dad, we didn't know. If we'd known you still had business interests, you wouldn't have tried to get rid of me?" I finished. "That's what you're saying? That my value as a person is tied to my net worth? That I only deserve respect if I'm financially useful?" The silence that followed was damning. "This is ridiculous," Douglas tried again. "You're my father-in-law. You can't be my boss. There are rules about conflicts of interest." I smiled. "Are there? Please tell me about these rules. I'm fascinated. Because from where I'm sitting, I'm simply a company owner, overseeing operations in an acquired firm. That's standard business practice, unless you're suggesting there's some personal reason I shouldn't evaluate your performance objectively." His mouth worked soundlessly. Admitting our relationship meant admitting I had legitimate reasons to scrutinize his work. Denying it meant accepting my authority, without question. "I thought so," I said. "Now, about those quarterly reports you owe me. I'll need them by Monday morning. And, Douglas, I'd suggest you triple-check your numbers. I've noticed some inconsistencies in your past submissions." He stormed out. Carol lingered, her eyes brimming with tears. "Dad, please, this is destroying us." "No, honey. You destroyed this when you decided I was disposable. I'm just making sure you understand the consequences." Monday morning, I arrived at his desk at 8 a.m. sharp. Douglas looked like he hadn't slept. Dark circles under his eyes, wrinkled shirt, the faint tremor in his hands as he reached for his coffee. "Good morning," I said cheerfully. "I have a special project for you." His face fell. "What kind of project?" "A complete operational audit of your department. Process flows, efficiency metrics, cost-benefit analyses for every major decision made in the past 18 months. I'll need comprehensive documentation, supporting evidence, and recommendations for improvement." That's at least a month's work, for a team. "Then I suggest you get started. I'll need it in 2 weeks. 2 weeks? That's impossible." "Is it?" I tilted my head. "Interesting. Because you had no problem expecting me to uproot my entire life in 2 weeks to move into Springdale Manor. Funny how timing suddenly matters when it's your comfort on the line. Understanding dawned on his face, not just of the assignment, but of the entire situation. This wasn't about business efficiency. This was about showing him exactly what it felt like to be powerless, to have someone else control your future, to be evaluated and found wanting. You're doing this because of the house, he said quietly, because we wanted you in a nursing home. I leaned in close. No, Douglas. I'm doing this because you wanted to throw me away like garbage. Because you looked at a man who raised a daughter alone, built a successful career, created something meaningful with his life, and saw nothing but real estate equity. During dinner, you said, a nursing home is waiting for you, like it was already decided, like I had no say in my own life. Remember? His face went white. He did remember. Every arrogant word. Well, guess what? I straightened up, smoothing my tie. Now I'm your boss. And every time you wondered how you'd make me comply, I'm wondering how you'll meet my standards. Every time you calculated my property value, I'll be calculating your professional value. Seems fair, don't you think? I walked away, leaving him staring at his computer screen, the impossibility of his situation finally, fully crushing him. 2 days later, he tried going to HR. Stephen Morris called me to his office. Protocol, he explained apologetically, where Douglas sat with printed company policies, highlighted sections about workplace harassment and hostile work environments. Mr. Palmer has expressed concerns, Stephen said carefully, about the nature of the assignments you've given him. Has he? I reviewed the documentation. Let's see. I've asked for operational audits, efficiency reports, and process documentation. These are standard requests during an integration. Nothing here violates company policy. The timeline is aggressive, Douglas interjected. So was yours. You gave me 2 weeks to pack up 35 years of my life. I'm giving you 2 weeks to document 18 months of work. Mine seems more reasonable, actually. Stephen cleared his throat. Mr. Palmer, I'm afraid Mr. Gilbert's requests are within his authority as operational controller. If you're struggling with the workload, we can discuss reassignment or additional resources. No, Douglas said quickly. Asking for help meant admitting he couldn't handle his job. I'll manage. Good, I said, standing, because I'd hate to think you were wasting company time with frivolous complaints when you have so much work to do. Watching him leave that office, shoulders slumped, face defeated, it should have felt satisfying, and it did. But there was something else underneath, something hollow. This was my daughter's husband. This was the man Carol had chosen, and I was systematically destroying him. But then I remembered the spreadsheet with $800K, D's business investment, written in bold letters. I remembered them discussing moving me to a cheaper facility if I lived too long. I remembered being treated like an inconvenient piece of furniture, and the hollow feeling disappeared, replaced by cold satisfaction. He wanted to play games with my life? Welcome to the game, Douglas. Let's see how you like being a pawn. July arrived with unprecedented heat for Seattle. The temperature in my house rose accordingly, but it had nothing to do with the weather. Douglas was drowning, and he knew it. I'd watch him from my study window in the mornings, sitting in his car in the driveway for 10-15 minutes before going to work, building up the courage to face another day under my supervision. He'd lost weight, his suits hanging loose on his frame. The swagger was completely gone, replaced by the hunted look of a man with no escape route. But a cornered animal is dangerous. I should have remembered that. The first sign came in a phone call from Jonathan Kelly. Russell, we've received a formal complaint from Douglas Palmer's attorney. You need to see this. The document arrived by courier that afternoon. 23 pages of legal accusations, conflict of interest, workplace harassment, age-based bias against Douglas, and, my personal favorite, a claim that I was psychologically unfit to manage corporate operations due to advanced age and potential cognitive decline. I read it twice, then called Marcus Torres, laughing so hard I could barely speak. This is perfect, I said. He's filing a conflict of interest complaint, which means he's officially acknowledging I'm his supervisor. He's providing documentation of our exact relationship. He's building my case for me. He's also desperate, Marcus warned. Desperate people make mistakes, but they also take risks. What else is he claiming? I scanned the document. He's alleging I've created a hostile work environment, given him impossible assignments as retaliation, and... Wait, this is interesting. He's suggesting I may have used insider information to orchestrate the IC acquisition specifically to gain power over him. That's actually creative. Paranoid, but creative. It's also unprovable. We've been negotiating the PNIC deal for 8 months, well before their nursing home plans. The timeline doesn't support his theory. What about the psychological fitness claim? I snorted. I'm 68, not senile. I run a multi-million-dollar consulting firm. I think my cognitive abilities speak for themselves. But fine, let's play his game. Schedule me for a complete psychological evaluation. Independent examiner. Full battery of tests. I'll prove I'm more mentally sharp than Douglas could dream of being. Marcus paused. You're sure? These evaluations can be thorough. I'm sure. And Marcus, while we're documenting everything, let's conduct an official audit of Douglas's work performance over the past 2 years. Deep dive. Every decision, every expenditure, every report. If he wants to open this door, let's walk through it together. The audit took 3 weeks and revealed exactly what I'd suspected. Douglas wasn't just mediocre at his job. He was actively harmful. Inflated expense reports that hadn't quite crossed into fraud, but lived in a very gray area. Project decisions that prioritized looking busy over actual results. A pattern of passing his work to subordinates while taking credit for their ideas. Most damning, a series of insurance policy reviews where he'd approved borderline fraudulent claims from companies that later went bankrupt, costing PNIC over $127,000 in unrecoverable payouts. Nothing criminal, just consistently poor judgment that someone should have caught years ago. How did he keep his job this long? Marcus asked, reviewing the findings. He was adequate when adequacy was enough. He looked good in meetings, talked a good game, and the company was profitable enough that individual mistakes got lost in the noise. But under scrutiny? I shook my head. He's been skating by on charm and mediocrity for years. Meanwhile, Douglas wasn't giving up. I had to admire his persistence, if nothing else. He and Carol started searching for dirt on me. I know because my accountant called to inform me that someone had requested my tax returns, legally through Carol as next of kin, claiming they needed the information for estate planning. My lawyer received inquiries about any past lawsuits. A private investigator actually showed up at my door, poorly disguised as a market researcher. They found nothing, of course. 40 years of working by the book meant there was nothing to find. No tax evasion, no hidden accounts, no shady business deals. I'd built Gilbert Risk Solutions legitimately, paid every cent I owed, and maintained meticulous records. The psychological evaluation came back with flying colors. Superior cognitive function for any age, the report concluded. Exceptional analytical abilities, strong executive function, no signs of cognitive decline. Patient demonstrates better memory and processing speed than the average 40-year-old. I had the results framed and hung in my office at PNIC. Petty? Perhaps? Satisfying? Absolutely. But Douglas's lawyer was better than I'd expected. His response to my audit was clever. He claimed I was using company resources to conduct a personal vendetta, that the audit itself was proof of harassment, and that my obsessive focus on his performance indicated personal bias rather than legitimate business concern. He's not wrong about the optics, Jonathan said during a conference call. We need to be careful here. If this goes to arbitration, they could argue you've created a toxic work environment, regardless of his actual performance issues. So what do you suggest? Document everything. Every interaction, every assignment, every evaluation. Make it so clean that even his lawyer can't find a foothold. And Russell? Maybe consider stepping back from direct supervision. Let me or Stephen handle the day-to-day. You've made your point. I almost agreed. Almost. But then I came home to find Douglas and Carol in the living room, surrounded by printouts and highlighters, building their case against me like I was some kind of villain who'd wronged them. Finding anything interesting? I asked from the doorway. They jumped, Carol's face flushed with guilt, but Douglas met my eyes with defiance. We're protecting ourselves, he said. You've been harassing me at work, retaliating because we tried to help you. Help me? The words came out sharper than I'd intended. Is that what you're calling it now? Trying to warehouse me in a bargain nursing home so you could fund your startup fantasy with my house? We were thinking about your future. No, Douglas. You were thinking about my money. There's a difference. I stepped into the room, and despite myself, despite everything, I felt tired. You want to fight this? Fine. Bring your lawyers, your complaints, your creative interpretations of events. But understand something. Every legal action you take is documentation. Every claim you make is evidence. You're building a record that shows exactly who tried to do what to whom. Carol stood up. Dad, please. This has gone far enough. Can't we just talk? Work something out? Work what out, honey? Should I apologize for refusing to be thrown away? Should I apologize for having a successful career you never bothered to learn about? Or should I just roll over and let you two get on with liquidating my life? She flinched, tears starting. It wasn't supposed to be like this. No, I agreed. It wasn't. It was supposed to be simple. Convince the old man, move him out, sell the house, pocket the money. The only problem with your plan was that the old man turned out to have resources you didn't anticipate. Douglas stood up too, jaw tight. You're enjoying this, watching me struggle, making my life miserable. You're getting revenge. I'm holding you accountable, I corrected. There's a difference. And Douglas, if you'd spent half the energy on doing your job well that you've spent on trying to avoid the consequences of your choices, you wouldn't be in this situation. I left them there, surrounded by their failed attempts to find leverage against me. In my study, I poured a scotch and looked at the documents Marcus had prepared. Airtight legal justifications for every action I'd taken, performance metrics that damned Douglas with his own mediocrity, and a path forward that ended with him either accepting a reassignment or leaving the company entirely. I'd won. The pieces were all in place. Douglas's desperate counterattack had failed, and now he'd run out of moves. So why did victory taste so bitter? Mid-July, the house had become a pressure cooker, and I could feel it building toward something. Explosion or implosion, I wasn't sure which. Carol had stopped eating properly. I'd find her in the kitchen at odd hours, staring at nothing, a cup of cold tea forgotten in her hands. She'd lost weight, developed dark circles under her eyes. She looked haunted, caught between two worlds, and unable to commit to either. Douglas, meanwhile, was spiraling. His legal maneuvering had failed, his performance review was a disaster, and the impossible project deadline was 3 days away, with barely half the work completed. He'd taken to drinking at night, not wine with dinner like before, but serious drinking. Scotch, straight, sitting in the dark living room until the early hours. I watched them both from a distance, my daughter and a man she'd chosen, and felt the weight of what I'd done settling over me like a shroud. One evening I found Carol in her old bedroom, the one she'd used before moving upstairs with Douglas. She was sitting on the floor, surrounded by photo albums, tears streaming silently down her face. "Can I come in?" I asked from the doorway. She looked up, startled, then nodded. I sat down beside her, my knees creaking in protest. Getting old was real, even if I wasn't helpless. "I'm looking at who I used to be," she said quietly, touching a photograph of herself at 12, gap-toothed and grinning, trying to figure out when I stopped being her. "You didn't stop being her. You just got lost for a while. Dad, I need you to understand something." She closed the album, her hands shaking. "I didn't want to hurt you. When Douglas first suggested the nursing home, I convinced myself it was for your own good, that you were lonely here, that you needed companionship, medical support. And the money? The $2.8 million house?" She flinched. "I told myself that was secondary, that we were helping you first, and the financial aspect was just practical planning. But that was a lie, wasn't it? I knew what we were doing. I just didn't want to admit it." I stayed quiet, letting her work through it. "He made it sound so reasonable," she continued. "Douglas has this way of presenting things that makes selfishness sound like logic. And I wanted to believe him because believing him meant I could have what I wanted, without feeling like a terrible person." She looked at me then, really looked at me. "But I am a terrible person. I tried to throw away my father for money." "Carol, no, let me finish. You said you're not taking revenge on me, that you're defending yourself. But Dad, I deserve revenge. I betrayed you in the worst way possible. And now I'm watching Douglas destroy himself trying to fight you. And I'm watching you become someone I don't recognize, and I don't know how to fix any of it. You can't fix it, I said gently. That's not how consequences work. Actions have weight, Carol. Decisions have prices. You chose to support Douglas's plan. Now you're living with that choice. I know, she wiped her eyes. But I want you to understand. I'm not making excuses. I'm just trying to explain how I got so lost. How I became someone who could look at her father and see dollar signs instead of the man who raised her. We sat in silence for a long moment. Downstairs I could hear Douglas moving around, the clink of bottle against glass. What do I do now? She asked. How do I become someone I can respect again? You make different choices going forward. You accept that trust, once broken, takes years to rebuild. You understand that some damage is permanent. But you'll give me the chance to rebuild. I looked at my daughter, 40 years old, crying on her childhood bedroom floor, finally understanding the weight of what she'd done. Part of me wanted to pull her into my arms and tell her everything would be okay, the way I had when she was small. But that would be a lie. I'll give you the chance, I said. But Carol, you need to understand something. I'm not the same person I was 6 months ago. You and Douglas forced me to become someone harder, someone who calculates costs and benefits in human relationships. That changes a person. Before she could respond, Douglas appeared in the doorway. His face was flushed from drinking, his eyes wild. Touching, he said, his words slightly slurred. Father-daughter bonding while he destroys my career. How sweet. Douglas, Carol started. No, he pointed at her. You need to choose, right now. Him or me. Your father with his perfect revenge plan, or your husband who's been trying to build a future for us? A future built on my father's assets, I said quietly. A future, Douglas shouted. Something better than this house, this city, this dead-end existence. But you couldn't see that. You had to be the hero, had to prove you still mattered. Well, congratulations, Russell. You've destroyed my career, humiliated me in front of my colleagues, and turned my wife against me. Happy now? I stood slowly, my knees protesting. Douglas, I gave you every opportunity to walk away from this. Even after that dinner, if you'd apologized, if you'd shown an ounce of understanding about what you were trying to do. Apologize? For what? For wanting a better life? For having ambition? For treating another human being like disposable property? For calculating how much my life was worth in real estate terms? For discussing which nursing home to move me to based on how long I might live, like I was an investment with a variable return period? Carol had stood up now too, backing away from both of us. Douglas, stop, please. Why? So Daddy can win? So his brilliant revenge plan can have the perfect ending? Douglas turned to her, his face contorted with desperation and rage. He's manipulated everything, Carol. The acquisition, the assignment, all of it. He's been planning this for months. And you're going to side with him? I'm going to side, Carol said, her voice breaking, with not being the person who throws away her father for money. I'm going to side with taking responsibility for my choices. And Douglas, my choice to support your plan was wrong. It was cruel and mercenary, and wrong. The color drained from Douglas's face. You're choosing him. I'm choosing to stop being someone I hate. After everything I've done, after everything we've planned. You planned, Douglas. You convinced me, pressured me, made it all sound reasonable, but it wasn't. It was never reasonable. He looked between us, his expression shifting from shock to rage to something like despair. Fine. Fine. You want him? Keep him. Keep this house. Keep your precious father. Keep your clear conscience. I'm done. He stormed out, and moments later we heard the front door slam, his car starting, tires squealing as he left. Carol collapsed back onto the floor, sobbing. This time I did put my arm around her, because whatever else had happened, she was still my daughter, and she'd just made the hardest choice of her life. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry, Dad. I know, I said, but sorry doesn't erase what happened. It's just the first step towards something better. Outside, the summer evening was beautiful. Golden light, warm breeze, the cherry tree in full bloom. Inside, we sat in the wreckage of our family, trying to figure out what, if anything, could be salvaged. Late August. The conference room at Pacific Northwest Insurance felt like a courtroom. And in a way, it was. Jonathan Kelly, my executive director, sat to my right. Stephen Morris from HR sat to my left. Across the table, Douglas slumped in his chair, his lawyer beside him, a sharp-eyed woman who'd no doubt cost him his remaining savings. At the far end of the table sat a representative from the legal department, there to ensure everything was documented properly. I slid a folder across the table. "Mr. Palmer, the performance audit is complete." Douglas's lawyer opened the folder first, her eyes scanning the contents. I watched her expression shift from professional neutrality to grim understanding. She leaned over and whispered something to Douglas, whose face went from red to white in the span of seconds. "The audit," I continued, my voice perfectly level, "has identified numerous policy violations and decisions that resulted in financial losses to the company, totaling $127,000 over the past 18 months. These include inappropriately approved claims, inflated expense reports, and project mismanagement that wasted significant company resources." Douglas's hands were gripping the edge of the table so hard his knuckles had gone bone white. A vein pulsed in his temple. He looked like a man watching his execution. "This is personal," he said, his voice hoarse. "All of this, it's because of the house, because of your daughter. You're using your position to enforce company policy?" I interrupted calmly. "Every finding in that report is documented, verified, and reviewed by independent auditors. Your lawyer is welcome to examine the evidence. In fact, I insist on it." His lawyer was already leafing through the documentation, her expression growing grimmer by the page. Financial records, email trails, decision matrices, performance metrics, everything meticulously documented and cross-referenced. "Under company policy," Stephen Morris said, reading from a prepared statement, "we're required to offer two options in cases of sustained poor performance combined with policy violations. Option 1, immediate termination with negative reference. Option 2, voluntary resignation with neutral reference." Douglas's mouth worked soundlessly. His face had taken on a grayish pallor, and I could see sweat beading on his forehead despite the air conditioning. His breathing had become shallow, rapid, like a trapped animal's. "You can't do this," he finally managed. "I'll sue. You'll what?" I asked quietly. "Claim discrimination? The documentation shows a pattern of poor performance going back years, well before I had any involvement with PNIC. Claim retaliation? These findings were verified by outside auditors who have no connection to me. Please, Douglas, consult with your lawyer. Take your time. But understand that every piece of evidence in that folder is legitimate." His lawyer set down the papers and leaned back, her expression professionally neutral, but her meaning clear. Douglas was done, and she knew it. "You've destroyed my life," Douglas said, and now there was no rage in his voice, just a hollow defeat. "My career, my marriage, everything. Over a house, over money." I leaned forward. "No, Douglas. You destroyed your own life when you decided another human being was worth less than real estate equity. When you sat at my dinner table and announced that a nursing home was waiting for me. When you and my daughter discussed moving me to a cheaper facility if I lived too long. You did this to yourself. We were trying to help. You were trying to dispose of me so you could fund your fantasy startup with my assets. Don't rewrite history now that you're facing consequences." He stood abruptly, his chair scraping back. "I want the resignation, with neutral reference." "Wise choice," Jonathan said. "You have 48 hours to sign the paperwork and clear your desk. After that, security will escort you from the building." Douglas looked at me one last time. "Was it worth it? Destroying your daughter's marriage? Turning her against me?" "I didn't turn her against you, Douglas. You did that yourself when you made her choose between her conscience and her bank account." I stood as well, meeting his eyes. "Carol made her choice. She chose not to be the person who throws away her father for money. That's on you, not me." He left without another word, his lawyer following. The door closed with a soft click that felt louder than any slam. "That was brutal," Jonathan said quietly. "It was necessary." That evening, I found Carol in the kitchen making dinner. Real dinner. Roasted chicken, vegetables, homemade bread. She'd been doing this for weeks now, trying to reclaim the pieces of herself she'd lost. "Douglas called," she said without turning around. He's moving to California, taking a job with some tech startup, if they'll still have him. He said to tell you that you won. Did I? She turned then, her eyes searching my face. You tell me, Dad. Did you win? I looked around the kitchen, at the house I'd fought so hard to keep, at my daughter trying to rebuild her life, at the victory that tasted like ashes in my mouth. I kept my home. I protected myself from being disposed of. I taught you and Douglas a lesson about treating people like disposable assets. That was the goal, and I achieved it. But you're right to question it, because the cost, I trailed off, unable to finish. Carol came over and hugged me, surprising us both. The cost was high for both of us. But Dad, I'm glad you fought back. I'm glad you showed me what I'd become. Because if you hadn't, I'd still be that person, the one who could look at her father and see dollar signs. I'm sorry it had to happen this way. Me too. But maybe that's the point. Maybe some lessons can only be learned the hard way. September arrived with cooler temperatures and golden light. I sat on my back deck one morning, coffee in hand, watching Carol work in the garden. She'd gotten a job, nothing glamorous, just administrative work at a nonprofit, and refused my offer to help with rent or expenses. I need to earn my own way, she'd said. I need to remember that money isn't free, that people aren't resources to be exploited. My phone buzzed. A text from Jonathan. Q3 numbers are excellent. When are you coming back to the office? I smiled and set the phone down. Maybe next week. Maybe the week after. For now, I was content to sit in my garden, in my home, watching my daughter tend the roses we'd planted together when she was 10 years old. Douglas was gone, moved to some Silicon Valley dream that would probably fail. His startup would crash, his career would recover, or it wouldn't, and his life would go on without me in it. That was fine. Carol was here, rebuilding trust one day at a time. The relationship we'd had before was gone, burned away in the crucible of betrayal and consequence. What was growing in its place was something different, harder, perhaps, but more honest. She knew now what it cost to betray someone who loved you. I knew what it cost to hold someone accountable, even when that someone was your own child. Justice had been served. The house was mine, my dignity intact, my life my own again. I'd won the battle completely and decisively. Douglas had lost his job, his marriage, his plans. Everything he'd tried to build on my back had collapsed. But sitting there in my garden, watching Carol try to atone for what she'd done, I understood something I hadn't before. Victory and vindication aren't the same as happiness. Justice doesn't heal wounds. It just acknowledges them. I'd won. The old man they'd tried to throw away had become their boss, had shown them exactly what it meant to underestimate someone, had proven that age doesn't equal helplessness. But the daughter who used to bring me dandelions was gone, replaced by someone who'd learned harsh truths about herself. The relationship I'd once cherished was fractured, possibly permanently. Was it worth it? That question didn't have a simple answer. Was I supposed to have let them warehouse me? Accept being disposed of for their financial convenience? Forgiven without consequences? No. Some betrayals demand a response. Some lessons can only be taught through hard experience. But I'd also learned something. Revenge is a sword that cuts both ways. You can win every battle and still lose something precious in the process. The cherry tree bloomed pink in the morning light. Carol looked up, saw me watching, and waved. I waved back. This was my victory, my home, my dignity, my life on my own terms. And this was its cost. The knowledge that family, once broken, can be repaired, but never truly restored. I'd won, and I'd paid the price, and somehow, impossibly, that had to be enough. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.
왜 웃으세요? 아니, 레나 언니는 부산을 갔던데? 참 부지런해, 이 언니는. 그치? 어. 응, 맞지. 동물사님 어서오세요. 이거 뭐야, 다크서클 봐봐. 에반데?